Hi, welcome to Free Exchange, hosted by the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood University. My name is Rachel Douchant, and joining me today is one of the fellows of the Liberty and Ethics Center, which is one of the focus centers within the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise, Dr. William Charron, Professor Emeritus from St. Louis University. Welcome, Dr. Charron.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you because you were a part of a significant shift in the direction of the philosophy department at St. Louis University, and I kind of wanted to hear a little bit about the story of what happened there and how you became interested in political philosophy in the first place.
Oh, good. Well, I came to St. Louis University in '67, which is the middle of the '60s, and everything was being politicalized. And I came there with an interest in mind-body problem.
Sure.
And I thought that's what I would work on. And there was a move in the department to politicalize the department, and the proposal was made that we have two foci in the department, metaphysics and political philosophy. And as I looked over the department, I thought the people who will be teaching political philosophy are all left of center. They're hard Marxists, socialists, and what have you.
Yeah.
And I said, the students have to hear the other side too.
Okay.
Being a libertarian of sorts, I took my history of modern philosophy and built a political component in it.
Okay.
And then in the graduate program, I focused on philosophers who were pro-private property and pro-market. So over the years, I've taught courses in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and his politics. And the reason I picked Aristotle is because of his early defense of private property. That defense is still used today, that there's more productivity through private ownership, that there is more freedom is possible, you don't live by the command of another, that it's really possible only through private property to have virtue, welfare, and taxation for welfare is not charity.
Right, so the virtue of generosity is lost?
Is lost.
Right.
And just the feeling that you're in control of your life.
Right.
So those four arguments have been passed on down through the years as arguments for private property.
And those are not so much natural rights arguments, but arguments that are based on a notion of human flourishing.
That's right.
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 So that's an interesting sort of alternative approach to libertarianism.
Right. And my whole approach to libertarianism is not through natural rights.
Right. Which is often what people immediately go to. They think of John Locke.
They think of John Locke, or the expansion of John Locke into 30 rights of the United Nations.
Oh, yes, the constantly expanding list.
Yes.
Right.
And the famous one, everyone has a right to a paid vacation.
Right.
Yeah,
well, and the notion that we don't really know where these rights come from anymore, sort of a faith, in their existence. Whereas if you go back to a account of human nature and what it is to flourish as a human being,
right.
Then it makes more sense to say, well, these are the circumstances under which human beings do well. And they're natural in that sense.
So I was happy to find this in Aristotle as opposed to Plato, who of course is a collectivist.
Yeah.
Thinks the state should run it all because the state's more reasonable than the people. And you have common ownership of all property.
Right.
But I also got very interested in David Hume because Hume to me is the first economically savvy libertarian.
Right.
Or if you would, classical liberal. And so I taught seminars in David Hume. And what I find interesting in Hume, this is a lawyer who really is watching the world move from the feudal age to the modern age. And he sees that the key element here is generation of private property or the institution of private property. And that you can't really understand economics unless you understand private property. I remember when I was taking economics as a student, we were exchanging all these goods, but no one ever talked about how they became my good.
Yes, for me to decide what to do with them.
What is mine? And you can't exchange unless we both agree that this is mine, and now we're going to have an exchange. So first is private property rights and the private property law. And then he says that will make possible markets. And what's valuable about markets is that it will bring peace. There are only a few ways you can get something. You can beg for it, you can steal it, you can produce it yourself, or trade for it.
Right.
And Hume was saying, you're not going to get very far begging. what will really give you what you want peacefully is trading.
Right.
So his basically has the same argument that Kant will have, that the institution of the market is peace preserving.
Well, and it's interesting because, like, Deirdre McCloskey, who I'm sure is drawing from Hume in some sense, talks about the way that you can have sets of virtues that sort of coalesce with a particular social or economic system. So you can have a kind of warrior culture, so courage is going to be the
Yes,
virtue, or you can
yes.
have a Christian monastic culture, and so that's going to have a certain set of virtues. But now there's this new thing, a commercial, not really new, old, but kind of expounding on what the virtues of a commercial or mercantile society would be. We have to shift to that. And so
Yes,
the idea that you
yes.
can be a respectable business person was kind of new at Hume's time,
new time,
right?
yes,
That could
yes.
be a praiseworthy thing to do with your life, because you're not a nobleman and you're not a peasant.
And I might say this, that I did not focus on Adam Smith in the seminars, but I did on Hume, because
Right.
Hume was Adam Smith's mentor.
Right.
And when Smith came out with The Wealth of Nations, he wanted to know, what does Hume think about this? Is this a failure, or is this a success?
Yeah.
And Hume died in 1776, and I believe The Wealth of Nations was published in February. Hume read it, told Smith it was fine,
Yeah.
and then Hume died, I think it was in August of 1776.
Oh, wow.
So in a way, we're covering Smith by covering David Hume. And the other individual I focused on was Immanuel Kant. Now, there was at the time a tendency, I'm talking about in the 60s and 70s, to read Kant as a socialist.
Right.
Which I thought was a totally wrong reading. They had to do a lot of twisting to get there. And they're following Hermann Cohen from the Marburg School of Neo-Kantians. But what Kant saw is that even without morality, the closest we can get to peace of immoral people, if you would, because I think Kant was a believer that we are living under original sin,
Right.
and you cannot plan on morality being the, if you would, engine of history.
Right.
It's self-interest which is the engine of history. But we can get closer to the appearance of a moral order with private property, with markets, and the globalization of those markets. Because he saw that with that would come peace. If one nation has something another has and needs it, it can go to war, or it can trade for it. And the other thing was hospitality. Open up the borders to businessmen so they can make deals in other countries. So I took these as kind of themes that were very libertarian.
Yes.
And taught those to the students, or at least had them read about it.
Can I ask a kind of challenging
Sure.
question about Kant? Do you think that history has borne out the view that commercial societies are less warlike, or have we created a kind of cronyistic warlike tendency where I'm thinking of fruit companies controlling our foreign policy in Latin America or something like that, right? Where we're kind of using our military to get into certain markets and things like that.
Well, there's one other condition for world peace for Kant.
Yeah.
That is that the countries are republics.
Yes.
And so if you have republics and you have free trade and you have cosmopolitan hospitality, and together with what he called something like a League of Nations, which is not a adjudicator, but a mediator of any conflicts, that you get peace. And historically, it has been borne out between republics that are commercial.
Right.
But not between.
Yes. So the commercial republics may still be warlike with others. Yeah.
We probably will not go to war with Canada. But,
no need.
No need.
Yeah, what would be the advantage of doing that?
We get their oil anyway.
So I see. So the free movement is an important element there, where if a country is locking you out of trading in their resource, then you kind of are tempted to use coercion and get into
So
things.
historically, the number of wars between republics has radically diminished.
Right.
Once they became commercial and fully Republican.
And by Republican, we mean self-governing. Do we want to add anything to that definition?
Well, I think he's not a Democrat in a sense of direct democracy.
No.
but it would be more, I suppose this country here would be an example of it, a representative democracy, which he would call a republic.
Right.
And so I used Kant and Hume and Aristotle as kind of the core of my graduate teaching, to let the students hear something other than left of center.
How do you think that, it's interesting because I know you have a background in Catholic education.
Right.
And of course St. Louis University is a Jesuit school.
Right.
And obviously the grounding in Aristotle is very Catholic. And yet we often think of Catholics, at least in higher education, as leaning left. And yet I sort of attribute your libertarianism somewhat to your Catholic background. So how do you explain that?
Well, this is an interesting thing. Leo XIII in the late 19th century feared socialism and feared, if you would, the confiscation of all property in a collectivist way. And what he did is argued for the revival of Thomism as a form of Aristotelianism.
Which is Thomas Aquinas.
As Thomas Aquinas, as the bulwark against socialism.
Right.
So that private property theory became part of his social program.
And that grounding in natural law kind of goes against the socialist tendency to think that human beings are totally plastic, that you can kind of shape them through state coercion. Yes.
So that lasted until Vatican II.
Okay.
Thomism was the dominant philosophy being taught in seminaries and Catholic universities.
Right.
Then there was a move to bring in phenomenology and continental sort of thinking.
Yeah.
And you'll find a lot of the theologians in the Vatican II were not Thomists. They were anti-Thomism. So you can talk about Catholic, and it has to be pre-Vatican II or post-Vatican II.
So it's a shift in time.
Right, in terms of their attitude towards markets or towards private property.
Yeah, and we need to wrap up for this session, and then we're going to come back after commercial.
Okay.
But I do, of course, associate John Paul II a little bit with a return to the sensibilities of pre-Vatican II, perhaps just in his own standing up against communism himself, in his home country of Poland, and appreciating what markets do. And,
well put.
And so forth. All right, so join us after the break to continue our conversation with Dr. Charron. Thank you.
And we're out. You got plans?
You bet. $50 million Americans struggle with hunger, but we can do something about it.
Excuse me.
What's going on?
Dinner. Please join me in helping put food on their tables. Together, we can feed America.
You guys keep going. I'm gonna get the plates.
Plates?
Find your local food bank at feedingamerica.org/hunger.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Welcome back to Free Exchange, hosted by the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood University. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. William Charron, who's a fellow for the Liberty and Ethics Center, housed in the Hammond Institute. So, Dr. Charron, you were telling us about the way that you yourself became interested in being really a political philosopher, and then in bringing that to the students in the Graduate School of Philosophy at St. Louis University. And I know from our work together that you eventually became interested in game theory. And so I'm sort of curious how that came about. We might associate game theory more with international relations or with economics. How did you as a philosopher become interested in game theory?
Well, I thought when I went into political philosophy, I would have to have some kind of formal critical apparatus in which to work, and that was game theory. And I consider game theory a formal logic of decision, just as symbolic logic is a logic of argument. So you'll find in many PPE programs, that is philosophy, politics, and education, or economics, they start with game theory. And so I became interested in that and went to the University of Michigan one summer and did some work on it and got up to speed on it and asked if I could teach a course in it. And I used someone else's book, and arrogant as I am, I said, I can do better than this.
For the textbook.
For the textbook.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So I began writing a textbook, which is about 3/4 done. And you have used it in your game theory.
Yes, I've taught with it about 4 times.
And I have a captive audience as students, so I didn't want to have them buy a very expensive game theory book. I gave them my book and sold it to them at the cost to me.
Very nice.
I did not want to, you're here, now you have to buy this.
Well, and one of the things that's so special about the approach that you take to game theory, which can get very technical and highly mathematical, is that if you're coming at it from a sort of interdisciplinary perspective, you don't necessarily want to get all that technical, right? You don't want to go all the way to some of the really heady stuff, but you want to get the basic strategic concepts.
Right.
And so what I like is that you have all of those concepts. You have Nash equilibria, all different kinds of games, but mixed in with it, you're bringing in examples from classic texts like Thucydides, philosophical texts like Hume and Aristotle. And so for someone who's got a humanities background, it brings game theory to life in a way, which I think makes it a really fun text.
Yeah, that would be the unique part of this book, is the attempt to integrate philosophers and historians
Right.
as exemplifying in an informal way
Right.
formal game theory. And you mentioned Thucydides, and I have several long pieces on Thucydides in there. The cause of the Peloponnesian War, understood game theoretically. What is the dynamic going on between Sparta and Athens and the satellite nations, and how this war, although it was mutually destructive, how it was rational for them to do it.
Isn't that strange?
Isn't
right?
that strange?
Yeah.
Isn't that strange?
Right.
So I decided to focus on game theory and teach it regularly. I taught it to graduate students once, and they did not understand it. Their backgrounds were quite different. So I taught it then to undergraduates. And so I got economics majors, mathematics majors, and philosophy majors who were interested in it.
And so you had better luck with undergraduates
Yes,
than with
absolutely,
graduates
yes.
because they had been trained one way, and so they couldn't absorb it.
Well, many philosophy majors have not taken economics.
That's right.
And they have, many of them know nothing about mathematics.
And which,
So-
if you think of the great mathematical insights from philosophers, and of course economics was part of, well, so was mathematics, right?
Right,
Was
that's
part
why
of
it's hard to
philosophy.
teach classical modern philosophy, 17th and 18th century, because to understand those people, you must understand not only Euclid and
Geometry,
Descartes,
yeah.
but also the whole story of the emergence of Newton. And they're all
Yes.
responding to Newton. Kant's
Right.
responding to Newton, Hume is, Berkeley is, and so on.
Right.
So
This is the paradigm shift
this
at
is
that
the paradigm
time.
shift,
Yes,
and
right.
they're reacting to this. So the game theory book will be classical game theory. It will cover lots from Thucydides, are examples. In fact, I wrote an article some years ago called Greeks and Games.
Oh, fun.
So it showed as the Greeks as, if you would, precursors of, especially Thucydides, of game theoretic thinking.
Right.
But what struck me when I first learned about game theory, and especially the prisoner's dilemma, is this was an X-ray on human relationships.
Right.
It's like, wow, now I understand. when you look at some situations from, if you would, objective point of view or third-person point of view, the people look like they're acting irrationally. They're harming themselves. They're harming each other, not themselves, but they're harming each other, which is not their intention often. It's not that they're in a war, but they're acting out of individual self-interest, individual rationality, and the harm that results is unintended effect of that interaction.
And you wake up and you think, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
Yeah, and that what a normal part of human life. It happens all the time.
And the example I love to use is my condo.
Oh, tell me about your condo.
Okay, I live in a condo, and there are 40 units in it. It was built in 1924, so that the electricity is a common good. You can use as much of the electricity in the building.
Yes, it's not individualized.
It's
to
not
each
individualized.
Unit. Okay.
So you can use as much as you want, but at the end of the year you have to pay up, and they divvy up the cost to all of the.
And guess what people do?
They
overuse.
And we have our meetings in January, and we say,
Sure.
This electricity bill is out of the world. Let's all conserve on electricity. And we say, yes, that's a rational thing to do, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, we all agree.
Turn off your lights when you go out. Don't put your thermostat down to 70. Leave it at 72 or whatever. You won't believe how much money we will save. And we all agree. But this agreement is not self-enforcing.
Yeah.
People have, if you would, a temptation not to comply with their own agreement, which was very good from my point of view. I see. They see how irrational it is, and they agree, but they don't do it. Why?
Right.
So what we have here is tragedy of the commons, or we have a prisoner's dilemma. So here I am. You picked me up today to come here, and I left a light on at my desk. And I didn't go back and turn it off. I left it on. And here's my computation. There are 40 units in this building. Whatever savings I can achieve by turning that light off, I only get 1/40th of the value of it.
Right.
So that, what the heck, that's a couple pennies. Let other people pay it. So everybody does that.
Sort of a perverse incentive. Yeah.
So that, to me, was, in the very beginning of my study of game theory, an understanding of how something can be, if you would, collectively irrational. These people are way overspending, but individually rational.
Right.
And so that
it explains so many situations in life, political situations and others. Yes.
Because the argument's made from the third-person point of view. The costs are too much. We all agree. Yes. Well, we all agree to reduce our costs. Yes.
Right.
Well, we have incentive to do it. No.
I think of things like, to apply it to political philosophy, for instance, I think of something like the logic of collective action. You have a case where there's a constant, the interests, parties of interest groups. They're going to get a concentrated benefit out of whatever special favors they can get out of their senator. And the rest of us are going to pay for that benefit, but only a little bit, right? And so we're not necessarily motivated to get together and lobby not to provide this benefit. And so slowly but surely you get more and more and more of these things. And then you wake up one day and you go, boy, this is really burdensome.
This is pretty burdensome. Which made me understand why the market works.
Yes.
Because you've got private property there, whereas you have a common property with my condo.
Right.
And you can have self-interested people who are not interested in the good of the other. Helping each other unintentionally by trading goods. So you have something I prefer to what I have, and I have something you prefer to what you have, so we can make a trade. I don't particularly want to help you. What I want is your piece of property. So there's mutual advantage, but self-interest.
But aren't you saying that greed is good? Isn't that always the accusation, right?
Yes.
In the capitalist economy, it's run on greed, and greed is good. What would you say to that objection?
To this, getting what you want through a trade is good.
Well, it's certainly peaceful and not warlike, which is something I like to point out. It's all relative, right? At least we're being peaceful.
Well, I would say you get into greed when you get into force and fraud. So if I come to you and say, I have a good here that you might want, and I know it's broken, And so I'm willing to get something out of you without giving something in return. That's greed.
That's real greed. Very good point.
Or another thing, I've got a contract here you can't refuse.
You're not allowed to
I'm going to
refuse it.
blackmail you if you
Right.
don't take this,
Right.
or let me have that. So there is.
So if we're trading, I could care about you. It would be okay if I did,
Could.
or I could not. But the point is, we don't have to rely on me caring about you. If I
Right,
don't, it'll
right.
still work.
Right.
So there's something conservative about it in that sense. People can still be as screwed up as they are, which people are, and you can still have a workable, stable system.
And the person I'm trading with, I might not even know.
Right.
I
They
don't
may just
say,
be a
where are they?
stranger.
Where's the person
Yeah.
who made my Toyota? I don't know where they are.
Right.
There are many of them, but I trade and I get what I want and they get what they want.
One of the things I appreciate about your approach to game theory is the distinction you make between, sort of self-interest or greed and interests of the self, right? Or self-interest
Right.
just means interests of the self. So Mother Teresa has certain interests, and she wants to employ a strategy that will
right.
result in her getting the time from volunteers that she needs and the supplies that she needs, and those are her interests. And we're sort of not questioning what your interests are.
This
We're
is
just
really important point.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Mother Teresa has interests as a self,
absolutely.
and they are in something, whatever it is.
Right.
And it may not be herself narrowly taken. But I think you must not think that game theory makes the assumption that all men are economic men, in the sense that they're narrowly self-interested.
Yeah, or that it's just money that I'm
or it's
trying
just
to
money,
maximize or something.
We're not necessarily money maximizers.
Right.
So my preferences, which are my preferences, may be in a material good for myself. It may be in a moral good for myself. It may be in a material good for you. It may be in a moral good for you. Or it may be in an ideal. I have an interest in giving money to some firm that I hope will solve the cancer problem for breast cancer.
Right.
Okay, that's my interest. And then let's say what you want is some money for a new vacation home. Now, in a way, we're both satisfying our self-interests, our interests of ourselves.
Right. They just happen to be
Let's
different
say-
sorts of interests. Yeah.
Right. So,
Right.
by doing what we have to do to get that vacation home, or to get the monies to give to the Cancer Society, or whatever charity it is you have.
Well, we have to unfortunately wrap it up for today, Dr. Charron, but thank you so much for talking to us about your career in political philosophy, and particularly about your textbook on game theory, and we can't wait till it's published.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for joining us here at Free Exchange, and please look us up on the web by Googling Hammond Institute.